anytime. Today, the Rules Committee is convening to consider 5 measures: H.R. 3383, H.R. 3628, H.R. 3638, H.R. 3668, and S. 1071. H.R. 3383, the Increasing Investor Opportunities Act, or INVEST Act, would end the Investment Company Act of 1940 with respect to the authority of closed-end companies to invest in private funds. This legislation is a consensus-driven, bipartisan capital formation package that will strengthen public markets, produce more opportunities for investors, and expand access to capital for small businesses. At its core, this legislation is about opportunity. Opportunities are not constrained by outdated regulations and red tape. H.R. 3628, the State Planning for Reliability and Affordability Act, would amend the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978 to add a standard related to state consideration of reliable generation. All of us understand how important a stable supply of electricity really is. It plays a critical role in the economy, public health, and other countless aspects of modern life. The reliability of electricity is one of the most pressing issues the nation faces today. It's a proven fact. The purpose of this bill is simple. It provides necessary clarity to an existing statute with respect to what reliable electricity generation really means. It's time the states return to fulfilling their reliability and dispatchability goals so that Americans can receive electricity that is as reliable as it is accessible. H.R. 3638, the Electric Supply Chain Act, would direct the Secretary of Energy to prepare periodic assessments and submit reports on the supply chain for the generation and transmission of electricity. This legislation is incredibly simple. It calibrates the focus and attention of the Department of Energy to study, understand, and face the challenges of securing our electric supply chain. If we ignore the different challenges associated with securing America's electric supply chain, it could lead to a whole host of consequences. With proper planning and positive steps being made to secure our electricity supply for the future, we can maintain a supply of reliable electricity that all Americans can benefit from. H.R. 3668, the Improving Interagency Coordination for Pipeline Reviews Act, would promote interagency coordination for reviewing certain authorizations under Section 3 of the Natural Gas Act. In almost every way, natural gas has become the flagship energy resource for America's electric power system. Ensuring the flow of natural gas remains paramount to the overall reliability of America's energy infrastructure. Unfortunately, our regulatory structure is poorly equipped to meet the needs of natural gas's new flagship status. No agency has the explicit authority to regulate natural gas system reliability. This bill will bring about that clarity and ensure agency coordination, a streamlined regulatory process, and an incentivized review process, all necessary to usher in the pipeline network that meets the needs of the American people and win the energy race of the future. Finally, we'll turn to S. 1071, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2026. The FY26 NDAA is part of a generational investment in America's national defense, and its provisions will play pivotal roles to ensure that our nation's military will remain the strongest in the world. This legislation contains a 3.8% pay raise for all service members, codifies all or parts of 15 separate executive orders issued by President Trump, and codifies 13 important legislative proposals requested by the Trump administration. No legislation is perfect. It's certainly not the bill I would have written. But at the same time, it's critical that we pass this legislation so that our nation can continue to build a ready, capable, and lethal fighting force to deter our adversaries. We have some very positive pieces of legislation before us today, and our Democrat colleagues, I hope, will join us in a spirit of bipartisanship and support them. With that, I now yield to the ranking member, Mr. McGovern, for any comments he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. This week we have a bunch of bills, most that don't really do much of anything, to be honest with you. We have a bill about pipelines that Republicans have tried and failed to pass into law 4 separate times. We have a bill that requires the Secretary of Energy to do something he could already do without any new legislation. We have a bill that hands out new favors to big polluters and oil giants. And we have a package of mostly bipartisan bills that probably could have come to the floor under suspension of the rules. My question is, where's health care? We're weeks away from going over a health care cliff. We're a month and a half from another government shutdown, and we're dealing with neither of those issues. Instead, we're wasting time passing suspension bills through the Rules Committee. We're advancing more corporate giveaways and more bills that have big, important sounding titles, but that don't really do much of anything. Are we going to have an emergency meeting this week, Madam Chair? I mean, do you know if we'll even be here next week? I'm hearing some rumors that Republican leadership might send us home. Meanwhile, many people have already dropped their health insurance for next year because they can't pay for it, and others are preparing to see their costs skyrocket. The president is supposed to give a big speech on affordability tonight. Well, here's an idea. Someone call him and tell him, skip the speech. Work with Congress to actually do something about lowering prices and making health care more affordable. We've been begging for action. And we've been begging for action while he calls it all a con job. Yet we're here in the Rules Committee meeting on things that, quite frankly, are not urgent or even important and probably won't make a difference in anybody's lives. I'd also just like to note that the NDAA House-Senate compromise is on our agenda, and this year's defense spending bill gives $8 billion more to the Pentagon than even self-styled Secretary of War Hegseth asked for. For all the Republican talk of government efficiency, after months of lectures from Elon Musk and from Republicans in this chamber about government waste, my colleagues are about to pass a defense spending bill that gives nearly $1 trillion to a government agency that has never passed an audit. Apparently, that's the reward for inefficiency at the Pentagon, getting more money than even asked for. I guess it's okay for Republicans to cut spending as long as it is not spending for something they like. No matter what the Pentagon says, no matter what our defense needs are, even if the Pentagon says they don't need as much money to defend the nation. Now, $8 billion might sound like a rounding error to the Pentagon, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a lot of money. $8 billion could send millions of kids to Head Start. It could feed millions of hungry veterans and seniors. As we gather here today, there are tens of millions of our fellow citizens who are hungry, who are food insecure. We have a hunger problem in the United States of America, the richest country on the planet. And we're not doing anything about it. We're making it worse. So I don't know why we're insisting on giving the Pentagon money for things they don't need when we are already having trouble paying for things that we do need. There are other things in this NDAA that I have issues with about the collective bargaining provisions or lack thereof, and there are some other things as well, and we can get to that in questions. But, Madam Speaker, again, I don't want to go any further into the substance of these bills, but at the center of affordability is people's ability to pay for health care while costs are going up and up. And with 2 weeks of session left in this year, apparently it is just not an issue Republicans care to act on with any urgency. And with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith from the Committee on Armed Services. Your full statement will be submitted for the record. We ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Chairman Rogers, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox. I want to thank you and Ranking Member McGovern for having us here today. I want to thank your staff. They've been very helpful in us trying to get this FY26 NDA to the floor for final passage, and I can't thank enough my friend and partner, Adam Smith, the Ranking Member of the committee, as well as Chairman Wicker and Ranking Member Reed. On the Senate side, we all work very well together in a bipartisan, bicameral way, and this product is a result of that. We chose to focus a lot of our efforts this year on fixing the Pentagon's broken acquisition process, which is failing our warfighters. The FY26 NDA includes a series of reforms to put commercial solutions first, eliminate regulatory burdens and bureaucratic inertia, and put in place a system that will deliver capability to the warfighter at the speed and scale. Fixing acquisitions will go a long way toward ensuring our warfighters are the most capable force on the planet. I also want to highlight our continued effort to improve the quality of life of our service members and their families. This bill provides a 3.8% pay raise for all of our service members. It authorizes nearly $3 billion for construction of new housing and dining facilities, medical facilities, child care facilities, and schools. It improves service member access to medical and mental health services. We will remain focused also in the bill on deterring our adversaries, especially China. This is a strong bipartisan bill, puts our warfighters first. It will build the ready, capable, and lethal fighting force that we need to deter our adversaries and ensure peace through strength. I urge all members to vote for it, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Ranking Member Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to echo the Chairman's compliments to the Rules Committee. Always been great to work with. Very difficult process, certainly up front with all the amendments. But even as we prepare this, you have a great team. We appreciate working together with you to get the product moved forward. Also want to really thank Mike Rogers for his leadership. This truly was a bipartisan process, and we worked with House and Senate, bipartisan, bicameral. Lots of disagreements, lots of arguments throughout the process. Some of it came out the way I would have liked it to, some of it didn't, but that is the nature of the legislative process. And Chairman Rogers really took the lead in making sure that everybody was included in that conversation. I appreciate that. I think it bodes well for the future of the Armed Services Committee continuing to be a bipartisan committee trying to work to make sure that we fulfill our duty of oversight of the Department of Defense and supporting the warfighter. That's great. And then what he said about acquisition reform, that is the cornerstone of this bill. Again, I really want to compliment Chairman Rogers. He spent the last 2 years doing the deepest of deep dives on acquisition reform, didn't just sort of pull a few ideas off the shelf. We had field hearings, we had constant conversations, we brought in industry, we brought in think tanks, we brought in Pentagon leadership to try and get this right. And most importantly, it is very aggressive, because that's what we need. We need to move the Pentagon towards being able to innovate faster and better. And this bill does that. That alone is a reason to pass it. As the Chairman also noted, we continue the efforts that were really started in earnest last year on quality of life issues for service members and their families, with the pay raise, with other supports in it as well. There are some outside committee bills that the outside committees were able to negotiate and put in that I think are also important. Very substantial foreign affairs reauthorization process, Coast Guard reauthorization. We also included a bill that was past jurisdiction, but others as well, having to do with counter-UAS ability. Major problem in this country, that we are not adequately prepared to defend ourselves against drones in a variety of different ways. This bill helps expand that authority. And then lastly, this bill does something that, to my knowledge, we haven't really done this year in Congress, and that is reasserts some of the authority of the congressional branch. And whether you're Republican or Democrat, I think you ought to be happy about that. For one, we repeal 2 AUMFs from 1991 and 2002 that have been on the books for a long time for no good reason. We also exercise authority on limiting the president's ability to draw down in Europe. We support Ukraine with $400 million in, I forget what we call that program, USAI. So it shows that support and says that the president has to work with us. We also fence some of the travel dollars for the Secretary of Defense until he complies with the law and turns over execute orders to us, and also turns over the videos from all of the strikes that have happened in the Caribbean. That's just basic oversight. Regardless of how you feel about those policies, we are supposed to be a co-equal branch of the government. And there's a few other items in there that do that as well, but I think it's a good balance. It's not trying to undermine the executive, it's just trying to reassert the authority of the legislative branch. I think that's perfectly appropriate. So overall, we've put together a great package. Personally, the only one thing that sort of sticks in my craw about it is I think we should have done what the original bill did out of the House, and protected collective bargaining rights for Department of Defense employees. I still believe the president's executive order on that is illegal, and the courts will overturn it and protect those rights, but it's something I think the legislative branch should have done for the DoD employees that we had jurisdiction over. With that, I yield back and welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. I'm going to defer my questions until later. Ms. Fishbach, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for being here and providing testimony. And I will just say I appreciate the fact that one of the first things out of your mouth, Mr. Smith, was bipartisanship. And so I appreciate that, and I am happy about the quality of life money that we're investing for our service members. And also, you mentioned it, and usually when Democrats are in front of us, I'm not complimenting them on their testimonies.
Don't go overboard.
Okay. But sincerely, I really think that the oversight.
Well, you might get him in trouble.
Okay. Okay, but that's, no, but sincerely, the increased oversight from the congressional branch, I think, is really necessary. And I think as we look at kind of looking at transparency, looking at understanding what's going on in these departments, this is important. And so I appreciate that. And I was just curious, either of you, maybe just give us some ideas on how it really strengthens our national security, but it also helps create good-paying jobs in rural areas. And so maybe someone, if someone wants to just comment on that, because my understanding is there was potentially some effort put into that for rural areas. Am I wrong?
And I don't remember anything
Okay.
focused on rural America.
Okay. All right, then I guess maybe that's the next one. No, I don't. But sincerely, I do appreciate the fact that it was bipartisan and that there is a lot going on here. So I appreciate you both being here, and I support the bill, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, and I do appreciate both of you and your leadership on the committee. I just have a couple of questions. Chairman Rogers, I have questions about two provisions that were left out of this version of the NDAA. So it's my understanding that the House-passed version of the NDAA included language protecting the collective bargaining rights of civilian DOD employees. That language is not in this version that we're dealing with right now. Can you explain how and why it was removed and who removed it?
We couldn't get consensus. It went to the leadership, and when we came back, the leadership said they couldn't reach consensus. They couldn't reach consensus at the Big Four level or at leadership.
And what was the issue on this?
Well, I mean, the issue is that, the president issued his executive order. He wants to eliminate collective bargaining for all federal employees, not just DOD. And Republican leadership in the House supported the president, ultimately. We pushed him on it. I had conversations with the White House that made it sound to me like the White House could have swallowed this, but ultimately Republican leadership decided that they didn't want to.
So when you talk about consensus, there was lack of consensus amongst the Republican leadership on this collective bargaining provision.
Yeah.
Let me ask you another question. In both the House and Senate versions of the NDAA included language for service members to access IVF treatments. So it was in both the House and Senate version. A majority of both chambers voted for bills with that provision in it. Yet somehow that was also stripped out. And I don't understand that happens when you have a provision that's in both the House and Senate. I mean, it would seem that there's not, I don't know what the contention would be. So why was it removed? Who made that call to remove that provision?
Well, ultimately, if I may, I mean, the way this works is this, Mike and I like to say, we just work here. We reach our consensus, and then leadership makes their decision. And leadership, if you're in the majority, you have more power. I think you're probably familiar with that concept.
They've been in the majority for a while, so
Yeah.
these things pass with them in the majority.
Understood.
Right.
But it's one thing to pass it out of one chamber or the other. It's another thing to have it actually go into law. There's all kinds of politics that goes into that. And on IVF,
But it was in both bills. both the House and
understood,
Senate,
but
right.
it's in both bills, but just passing it, even if each chamber individually passes it, it's not the same as putting it into law. Once you get to the point where you're going to put it into law, people rise up and have concerns in a bunch of different directions depending on the issue. And IVF, we all understand, is there's language from pro-life forces that they want to put in there about protecting the embryos forever that is very impractical. So you've got a lot of Republicans who are strong supporters of IVF, and you got a lot of others said, I can't support it unless it has this pro-life language. So it was a clash within the Republican conference that they could not resolve. As far as I know, pretty much every Democrat would support it, but the Republicans are split on the issue, and they chose not to have that fight.
Yeah. And again, if they wanted to have that fight, I don't know why they didn't have it at the committee level or on the House floor or.
We had the fight at the committee level on the House floor, and it was in both bills.
Right,
But
so, well, that's
Adam's
the thing.
right, at a certain point,
right.
after we deal with it, leadership takes it over, and
Well,
they make
yeah,
they make their call.
And that's very disconcerting.
Yeah. Well, there's one other point, if I may, sorry, that's worth pointing out. We're trying to get the bill passed, and there's this delicate little balance that most people don't realize. People have a lot of different reasons for voting against the bill, so we got to calculate, as we put this package together, is it going to get enough votes to pass? I mean, the acquisition reform is really important. We got a lot of Democrats who are going to vote against this bill for a variety of different reasons. If we lose a swath of Republicans over the language on IVF, then we don't have a bill that can pass.
I get it, but I kind of would like to think that, and I'm not just talking about this bill, but other bills, is that when both chambers act and adopt similar language, that, that language isn't sacrificed because leadership has concerns. I mean, I think you're giving me an answer. It's just not a very satisfactory one from where I sit, as not a member of the committee, as a member of this House, who thinks that, at the end of the day, the way this place works is that, if there's a difference between bills and chambers, you negotiate them, but when they're the same, you ought to just accept it. But in any event, that's not the case. But I appreciate your work, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to express a similar concern in that I do believe that if the House language and the Senate language is the same, not similar, but the same, then there should be respect for that. And now granted, there's going to be sometimes I'm going to be on the losing end of that, and there'll be other times that I'm going to be on the winning end of that. But if the House and Senate language is the same, then I'm concerned that we're setting a precedent of disregarding the work of the
If I could, Austin, just say.
Yes, sir.
There is respect for that, and it's a big part of the conversation. But I want to make sure everyone listening understands, at the end of the day, if we insert something that jeopardizes the ability of the whole bill to pass, because none of these issues stand on their own, all right? And there may be people who support that, but oppose the bill for a different reason, you still got to be able to cobble together a majority. And this is something I think is really important. It's something that I think people fundamentally misunderstand when they always say, oh, politics, you guys, you guys don't get anything done just because of partisan stupid stuff. No, at the end of the day, you got people in a lot of different places, and you have to have a majority for the thing that ultimately passes, and you're squeezing a balloon to some extent. And so if you add something in that now when you look at the totality of the package is going to contribute to sinking it, and also I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm not clairvoyant. I don't know. If we'd put it in there, would it have been enough to sink it? But we got to make those calls, and there certainly was enough pressure from the Republican side on the issue you're concerned about and that other issue that it would have made it very difficult.
I understand that, and I respect both of you. I'm on the committee with you. I think the two of you probably do the best job of working together through extremely difficult issues that are extremely important to the country. I will tell you, as someone who supports our democracy and the legislative branch, I think that we are being pushed around in a lot of cases as the members, and if the language of the House matches the language of the Senate, I don't think it needs to become commonplace for that language to be disregarded when the House and the Senate language match. And I will say this, and I don't know if the language on this issue was similar or if it was exact, but certainly if the language is exact, for the sake of the democracy, I think the committee process needs to be respected. I want to just say this. The two of you do an exceptionally good job of working together, making decisions based on facts, not emotion. I appreciate being on the committee. I appreciate the leadership of both of you. I appreciate your work on this bill. I look forward to supporting it on the floor of the House. And with that, unless Mr. Rogers, you have anything you'd like to say, I know there's a nice pay raise in here for the troops, and I know they'll appreciate it. And I think the modernization and the acquisition process, it baffles me that it took the United States Army 10 years to field a pistol that was readily available at most sporting goods stores. With that, I yield.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I don't have any questions. I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Neguse. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, you probably don't have any recollection of this, but there's this one little point that I've been after for about 15 years that I consider to be unconstitutional. It's in the 01 AUMF and gets re-upped every year by policy in the NDAA. And your committee put language in. It's not my preferred language. It's the old Rosendale language. And then it got stripped out in this conference report. Do you have any recollection? Was there a discussion, or it was just one of those things the committee said it wasn't important?
Yeah, it did, it got stripped out before it got to the big floor level. I couldn't tell you what.
Yeah. Because as you know,
I don't remember.
as you know, and there are lots of big issues in here, but to me, because I see this as permitting, although it's never been used that way, permitting unconstitutional detention indefinitely of American citizens, I have never voted for anything longer. I think I did a 60-day one time because Goodlad asked me to, but I've never voted for an NDAA longer than about 60 days when we were trying to work it out that doesn't have language in there to protect American citizens from detention by the military. And so I will be voting no on the bill. I mean, yes on the rule, because I think it's something that needs to be brought to the floor, but I will be a no on the bill itself. And I just want you to know it's that policy I've had since I first got here and read the bill.
And we have had this conversation
Yes, sir.
before. And the issue is that fundamentally changes the Constitution by only saying that citizens are not subject to that permanent detention, because then we've had this argument. The Constitution doesn't say citizens. The First Amendment applies to all people in the United States. So if we were to say it for this,
And
we'd
Madam
be-
Chair, the
Right.
gentleman is correct.
Yeah.
I have offered other language as well to the committee, and the committee has always rejected that. So I'm
I'd
caught.
take it.
I understand. I'm caught between a rock and a hard place
Yeah,
because
no,
I give the
I
committee
hear
their
you.
choice. My language could actually deal with just people on American soil that it doesn't apply. But I do want to protect U.S. citizens, and however we need to get the language in there. Hopefully someday we'll get this problem fixed. And again, the military has not abused it up to this point, but my fear is if you leave a door open, somebody someday may walk through it, and I want to close that door. So I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Ranking Member and Chairman. It's nice to see you back here. Last time you were here, you were not in agreement. We did not have, I think, bipartisan support on the NDAA. And so it's nice to see you back, and that several of the, not all, but several of the most egregious provisions were stripped out. I'm really pleased to see the support, as my colleague, Mr. Scott, recognized, for our members, right? Increasing their pay, but also increasing their ability to access health care. I represent Cannon Air Force Base. They do great work over there. It's a rural area, and so many of our bases are in rural areas. And we need to be able to get them the health care they deserve, little things that people might not pay attention to, but just upping the reimbursement rate so they can get to those specialists. I'm real pleased that in the appropriations bill, we incorporated Cannon's innovative circuit rider provision in terms of funding, where they can bring specialists in to see doctors on a rotating basis. Really great. So this issue around healthcare is really important to me, given what I know about rural bases, and that our service members should get that healthcare. And Chairman, you and I share something. We both have 3 kids. Yeah, and I always say that having those 3 kids was the most impactful, wonderful thing I ever did, and I'm assuming you would say the same. Absolutely. Yeah. And you also probably know how many couples struggle with fertility, with having babies. One, to get pregnant and to hold that pregnant. Miscarriages happen. They break our hearts. You know that, right? Do you know the percentage of people who struggle with?
I do not.
It's 13%, Mr. Chair, and that's why it's really hard to fathom that we stripped out of this bill the IVF coverage, because that means our service members are not going to get the kind of care that families outside who aren't participating and sacrificing for this country would get. And I just don't see why we couldn't have fought for that harder. Mr. Chair, and I know Ranking Member Smith, you've tried to explain things, but Mr. Chair, I mean, these are people's desires to have families. Could you have fought a little harder for us?
Could I what?
Have fought a little harder to keep this provision that was in the Senate and in the House and the
We still had it in at the Big
bill?
Four level. This was decided by leadership. This was not decided by the four of us.
Well, this is
So
the
this is
problem.
not about me or Adam fighting harder.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem because, President Trump has said he's the IVF president. And it doesn't do us any good if he wouldn't have come and fought for this as well. Because it doesn't help when we just put something out on Truth Social or on social if you're not going to actually turn it into legislation. And so many of your members, so many of our members have used IVF, and it's the only way they get to have that family that we know is so important. I wanted to move on to the issue of accountability, and thank you both for making sure there is some reassertion of Congress's role in this. And my constituents are very worried about the actions in Latin America. And because it's not just against Venezuela, it's against others. And the idea that two men clinging to a raft after what was potentially an illegal strike in the first place. We are the largest, strongest military in the world, and two men clinging to a raft would be a threat? Ranking Member Smith, I mean, what are your concerns with regards to these strikes in the
Sure.
that we're seeing?
Just for the sake of accuracy, they were clinging to the front of a
Sorry.
capsized boat.
Clinging to a boat.
They were clinging to the bow of their boat that had, well, capsized after we'd bombed it. It had caught on fire and flipped over. Look, I'm very concerned about the legal underpinnings around this, about the lack of transparency in the last week or two, thanks to the Washington Post, which we always love to denigrate, actually releasing this story. It has forced the Pentagon and the White House to come over and talk to us a little bit. We did have a briefing from Admiral Bradley. He's coming back up again next week to brief the full committee. Had conversations with others around Southern Command. But it was way, way late in coming. And my concern is that the legal justification just doesn't hold water, and it is a dramatic expansion of the president's power. And I want to just take a moment, if I could, to explain this, because back when we really got started on this, after 9/11, and we were going after Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, I think that all made sense. I mean, Osama bin Laden was hanging out in Afghanistan, plotting to kill as many Americans as he could possibly kill. And he had a lot of people supporting him, not just in Afghanistan, but elsewhere. As General McChrystal said at the time, it takes a network to beat a network, so we got to go find where these people are and stop them before they get to us. They were trying to kill us. But then that effort metastasized, all right? Because if Osama bin Laden's coming at us, well, then we got these people in Yemen. AQAP, as they were called. We've got people in Somalia, and we got people in West Africa, and people in Pakistan, and we sort of extended the net of people who we felt that we had to kill before they kill us. I mean, that's fundamentally what self-defense is. And even if you accept the legal underpinning of what we're doing with these 24 designated narco-terrorist groups, I want everyone to think about how dramatically that expands the power of the president. We are now saying that anyone who is trafficking in narcotics, and not just fentanyl, which is the real deadly piece, but cocaine as well. Not that people don't overdose from cocaine, but statistically, I think it's considerably smaller than fentanyl. And what about marijuana? I mean, people stick fentanyl into marijuana, and sadly, there are a lot of people who thought they were smoking a perfectly okay drug that had fentanyl attached to it that killed them. All right? Once you expand and say, if you are any part of that network, then you are the same, exactly the same as Osama bin Laden trying to fly those planes into those buildings. How many millions of people are now subject to lethal force without any due process or probable cause? Because that's what this is. That dramatic an expansion of power at an absolute minimum ought to have congressional approval. Because say what we want about the forever wars, the global war on terror, Congress came together, we passed the 2001 AUMF. We gave that authority. No specific authority has been given for this. And now you want a forever war? You know, you're going to have to fight these terrorist groups until you stop the deadly flow of narcotics into the U.S.? That's how long we're going to give the military the power to basically be judge, jury, and executioner for this many people? It's an incredible expansion of executive power. I don't think we should give them. We haven't given it them, and we certainly need oversight to understand better what it is they're planning on doing.
Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. And I'd also point out the hypocrisy of this administration in the sense that he has pardoned over 100 people accused of drug-related crimes during his time in office. You know, the recent pardon of the former president, Hernandez, 400 tons of drugs brought into the United States, and there was a conviction and there was a trial. There was proof. There wasn't a strike on a boat in the ocean. We had the proof, and he pardoned him. President Trump pardoned somebody who was convicted of 400 tons. Another pardon in Chicago, $100 million worth of drugs trafficked in Chicago a year, and he pardoned them. So if you're going to talk about going against drug traffickers, stop pardoning those who have been convicted. And definitely don't pull us into a forever war without congressional approval. I would say we should never approve such a vague kind of war.
Agreed. And I personally like to include Ross Ulbricht, the crypto Silk Road guy who was convicted of laundering billions of dollars in drug money for precisely these same narco-terrorist groups, who was also pardoned by the president, which raises one other troubling question that I want people to think about. Is this about stopping drugs coming into the U.S.? You know, to your point, all the people have been pardoned. It seems like there's a bit of an inconsistent approach. And if it's not about that, well, what is it about? Well, if you look at the national security strategy that was released by the White House last week, it seems to be about the U.S. wanting to dominate the Western Hemisphere, and in this case, targeting Venezuela. And that also leads us into more conflict in the region, and also I think is a fundamentally incorrect foreign policy. I don't think the United States of America should be about the business of trying to dominate any hemisphere. That's not supposed to be who we are. We're supposed to be presiding over a rules-based international order, benefit us, certainly, but to benefit others as well. So for anyone who is concerned about interventionism by the U.S., you know, be concerned about that point too. Are we going to do regime change in Venezuela? You know, I would hope we would have learned our lessons of the last 25 years, and that the answer to that question is no. But the rhetoric from the president certainly implies otherwise. So if we want to restrain the forever war problem, these are two big issues that I think all of Congress should be concerned about and be aggressively exercising oversight. I do want to thank the chairman for working to get Admiral Bradley to come in and brief us. We've got a brief tomorrow, we've got another one next week, but I think we definitely need to be concerned about this.
Thank you for that. And I do think that there is the issue of whether there's been a betrayal of promises made to a campaign to keep the United States out of foreign wars. in both the recent released strategic report and these actions. And with that, Madam Chair, I will yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
Thank both of you for coming, and it's been a good hearing. I don't think I go anywhere in this country, particularly in South Carolina, people don't ask me, when are you going to get your financial house in order? When is the gravy train going to stop? Now, the NDAA, it has some great things in it. We're $8 billion above what President Trump wants, his budget. We're $8 billion what the House passed. Can y'all explain to me what we're missing to be able to continue this?
Sure. I mean, and people have different opinions. The chairman supports a larger defense budget. The Senate authorizing bill had $32 billion over the president's budget. We came to at 8. And if it makes you feel any better, at the end of the day, we have no control over this. We're ultimately not going to set the top dollar. What's going to set the top dollar is going to be the Appropriations Committee. And they are currently in negotiations. I was just reading something as I was waiting here that there may be some sort of agreement on a top line for defense. I would support sticking at the president's budget. Now, one thing we both do. I mean, in this context, I didn't want to misrepresent you. But,
I didn't like it, but I did.
Yeah, there we go. So now I will say this, and I think it is something that people should consider, that if we as authorizers sort of put that, stake in the sand at 8 billion plus, that can potentially influence where the appropriators wind up. But ultimately, if we want to get after that, we can get after that in the appropriations process. And I'm with you. It ought to be president's budget.
So it's pretty much out of your hands. I get that. But, your financial experts have now, I think, come around to the conclusion, the Congress is pretty much irredeemable to handle this and to put ourselves on a diet. It's going to come to, when they stop buying our bonds, it's going to be a dead stop for this country. We won't have an NDAA to go to. So y'all, all I would ask is, this is going to be publicized pretty broadly because regardless of where the buck stops, and I get appropriators, but to go 8 billion above what the president asked for, is there one area that took up the bulk of the 8 billion, in your opinion?
No, I
It's
don't
just
think
across the board.
Like I say, the Senate wanted 30 billion more than, and this is where the leadership basically landed. We both stuck with the president's budget, and leadership decided 8 billion was where they would land, not give the Senate the 30. They wanted the Senate's not happy.
I've
They
lost.
actually get to say so in this process too.
I've lost faith in the Senate. I mean, I don't have any control over it. I'm not a senator. I'm a lowly House member. I guess it's just frustrating to see continually going down this path and continually, and it's not just the NDAA. Farm Bill is going to have Christmas ornaments everywhere, and it's Christmas time. But it's things that have nothing to do with farming. Now, on the transgender, I know, Ms. Smith, you mentioned that the allowing biological women to play in men's sports was out of here, but every other anti-LGBTQ was left in.
Invert that. In the bill is a prohibition on transgender
That
women
one
participating. That's in the bill. The rest of it is out. Not in the bill. The other portions that came out of the House that were restrictive in other areas.
Okay, so the transgender plan against men is in the bill or not?
The sports.
The
part,
sports.
Yeah, is in the bill.
Okay. Any reason why on that?
I lost. Well, that's not entirely true, actually.
You lost?
No, I'm not unsympathetic to the idea that having transgender women participate in women's sports is at times unfair. I am not unsympathetic to that idea, and it's something I think we need to wrestle with, have a conversation about. My position is it's not something we should be legislating, and the NCAA, it's already the rule. I don't have a problem with the rule, but I don't see it necessary for us or any other legislative branch to impose that. I think every athletic, league, where should make their own determination. But I do understand how in some instances that has been unfair to competition and something that every sports league, I think, has to deal with.
Okay, well, thank y'all for your work on this. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Houchin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the members of the committee for working to get this package across the finish line before the end of the year. I especially want to thank Chairman Rogers for working closely with my office to ensure the inclusion of the pilot program on Navy installation nuclear energy in the final version of the bill. This provision supports the creation of a pilot program to facilitate the deployment of small modular nuclear reactors and mobile reactors at our Navy installations, meeting the growing energy needs and demands of the U.S. military, securing critical infrastructure, and decreasing dependence on civilian energy networks. I'm thankful for your partnership, Mr. Chairman, in prioritizing this program and securing this win for our military. So I want to thank you for that. This package also, though, achieves much more. It generates a 3.8% raise, pay raise for our service members. It secures America's borders, and it saves taxpayers nearly $20 billion. Mr. Chairman, Chairman Rogers, if you could also just walk us through how this package is going to improve the quality of life, especially for junior enlisted troops who have been most affected by rising costs of living.
Sure. Last year, we made a huge leap, but we said then that wasn't going to be it. So, in addition to giving them a 15% pay raise last year, we do come in behind it this year with 3.8%. We give them bonuses, special pays and allowances. We increase their eligibility for a basic needs allowance to supplement low-income families. We're spending $1.5 billion more on barracks and family housing, improving the rights of families to live in privatized housing. We're going out of our way to try to make sure these families feel valued and want to stay in the military, because truth is, it doesn't matter how sophisticated our weapon systems are if we don't have good people. And I think we have turned the corner on that. What we did last year was a huge leap, but we said last year we would come back and layer more on it. We did it this year. One of the things I'm particularly proud of is that we prohibited the department from decreasing the number of physicians and nurses that we have. That health care is a very important aspect of quality of life that we need to be attentive to, and we did in this bill.
Well, I want to thank you very much. Thank you both for caring about our men and women in uniform, and appreciate your work on this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. And I thank our witnesses for being here. I'm only going to make a comment that I have worked for years with the committee on trying to reform acquisition, and I'm grateful to see, and as somebody else said, it's taken way, way too long. I'm not sure we're where we ought to be, but we ought to be bringing down the cost of equipment and materials and saving millions and billions of dollars. So I thank you all for the work that you have there. I see no one else seeking to ask a question. So with that, you're dismissed. Thank you very much. I now welcome our second panel, Representative Latta and Representative Castor from the Committee on Energy and Commerce. Your full statement will be submitted for the record. We ask you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Latta, I welcome your testimony.
Oh, there we go. Various outdated state and federal policies have driven the premature retirement of essential baseload power generation. This has intensified a reliability and affordability crisis across the nation. Grid authorities have repeatedly told the Energy and Commerce Committee that during times of peak demand and extreme weather events, large regions of the nation are at risk of blackouts and brownouts, and too many Americans have witnessed this in recent years. To add to this, we have seen two additional issues. One is the unprecedented growth in the demand for power from growing manufacturing industry and the AI race. The second is reduced supply due to the constraints in the supply chains needed to deliver or produce more energy. The combined loss of baseload generation, growing demand, and tight supply of fuels and components is causing Americans to experience a perfect storm of plummeting reliability and rising electricity prices. The legislation today takes practical steps to address some of the factors behind this affordability and reliability crisis. State policies that limit reliable generation, constraints and costs in the energy supply chain, and the need for timely and efficient permit reviews for the pipeline infrastructure that supplies fuel for power generation. H.R. 3628, the State Planning for Reliability and Affordability Act, sponsored by the gentleman from Colorado's 8th District, asks states to prioritize reliability and affordability when planning generation and transmission. Electric utilities undergo an exhaustive process to plan investments in new generation and transmission to meet future demand and meet responsibility for providing power. Yet many states have been imposing renewable energy standards on this planning process that effectively require the shutdown and replacement of base load power plants with intermittent power from wind and solar energy. While there is a role for a diverse energy mix in planning, the policies favoring wind and solar have become widely attributed to driving out the essential energy sources needed to keep the grid reliable. We need to add more firm, affordable energy to restore grid reliability. This bill would require state public utility commissions to consider, and let me emphasize that, to consider implementing requirements for utilities to have sufficient generation from reliable and dispatchable energy sources like natural gas, nuclear, coal, and hydropower over a 10-year period. This places accountability on states to end policies that are making it difficult for people to keep the lights on. Second, my legislation, H.R. 3638, the Electric Supply Chain Act, would help address supply chain constraints that make building new generation and transmission slow and more expensive. It would direct the Secretary of Energy to conduct ongoing assessments of trends, risks, and vulnerabilities in supply and demand for the components needed for building more generation and transmission. This includes vulnerabilities from reliance on materials and components from China and other adversaries. It would look at the shortages that have made components more expensive and provide analysis that will help us address these shortages. This is key to bringing down costs and supply security up. Finally, H.R. 3668, the Improving Interagency Coordination for Pipeline Reviews Act, sponsored by the gentleman from North Carolina's 9th District, makes the federal permitting for interstate natural gas pipelines more timely and efficient. This legislation would strengthen FERC's existing lead role over permitting by requiring schedules, simultaneous reviews, and more enforcement authority to resolve disputes between agencies. It would streamline water quality reviews by moving that responsibility from the EPA to FERC. Instead of an applicant being responsible for receiving a Clean Water Act Section 401 certification from a state through EPA delegated authorities, FERC would incorporate that in the NEPA review. This legislation maintains the state's authority to raise and remedy legitimate water quality concerns while bringing more predictability to the process. FERC would still consider terms or conditions proposed by the states involved in the process and include those necessary for compliance with the underlying statute. Increasing pipeline capacity increases supply of natural gas for power generation. With more supply, there will be lower energy costs. More than 40% of the electric generation comes from natural gas. It is a key component in keeping the lights on. We must have sufficient pipeline capacity to transport it. And this package of legislation of these three bills deserves strong support from this Rules Committee, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Castro, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members, for the opportunity to be here to testify on the three energy and commerce bills. They come at a time when American families are really grappling with higher electric bills. Household electricity prices are up 13% on average across the country. This year, I noted it in North Carolina, up 17%, so I know you're probably hearing it too. In Florida, the three largest utilities have requested $34 billion in rate increases, and last month, they granted Florida Power and Light a $7 billion rate hike, so that if you're an FP&L customer, comparing your bill in December of 2020 to what you will pay in 2026 will be over $500 more. I was with a group of folks back home, and they were burning their electric bills. They are so outraged by what is going on, and they're looking to the Congress for solutions. They want us to work together to lower bills. But unfortunately, what's coming out of the Energy and Commerce Committee, what's happening in the Trump administration is taking us in the wrong direction. If you look at the big, ugly bill, everything that happened to take away cleaner, cheaper sources and take away tax credits, they estimate that that's going to increase energy bills by 61%. Then when you add in the arbitrary tariffs, that's not just on energy, but it's on poles and wires and everything we need for the electric system. That's raising costs. When the Trump administration came in and canceled cleaner, cheaper, permitted, approved projects, that's raising cost. It's all a recipe for skyrocketing electric bills. So it's adding up. They're saying health care costs are going up. You know, in my district alone, 150,000 people are facing the health care cliff because the Republicans won't come to the table on tax credits for health coverage. Then when you add on grocery bills, electricity bills, they just at their wits' end, and they deserve so much better. So when you look at these three bills before us today, I recommend that you do not move them forward, that you tell the Energy and Commerce Committee to go back to the drawing board, to work together to find some bipartisan solutions on permitting and helping people lower their electricity costs. So the bill specifically, the first one, Pipelines Review 3668, all that does is it strips states of the ability to enforce their clean water laws when it comes to gas pipelines. Instead, it would give that power to FERC. FERC is an agency that has already testified and admitted they do not have the personnel or expertise. This is not in their area of expertise. They don't know where to start on clean water permitting. So I submit to you that's going to increase costs, that's going to increase time, and do the opposite of what they intend in the bill. 3638, the Electric Supply Chain Act, would require the Department of Energy to study deficiencies in our supply chains. I think I would have supported this bill in past Congresses. This would have been worthwhile. Unfortunately, in the intervening year or so, under Elon Musk and Doge, they have taken such a hatchet to the experts at the Department of Energy. There is no one to do the work here. We've asked when the Secretary and other Department of Energy witnesses came before the Energy and Commerce Committee, who is available to do this work, they could not even answer that question. So there is no reason for the Congress to add more bureaucracy and red tape to the Department of Energy without any understanding that this work could be done. They have forced out, by the way, over 3,500 experts and public servants at the Department of Energy. They deleted the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains from the department's organizational chart. The next one is 3628, state planning. That would amend the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act to force states to favor dirty energy sources over cleaner, cheaper energy. It is a ridiculous requirement to say we know better than a lot of states on their energy resource mix. The energy mix in Florida is entirely different from the energy mix in New Mexico or the energy mix in Georgia or Virginia. So now you're saying, okay, don't look at a time when we have escalating energy demand. It makes no sense to put your finger on the scale and say the cleaner, cheaper sources, solar, wind, and storage, they don't get a fair look. Instead, oil and gas companies get the benefit. So that's going to be costly as well at a time when families really deserve better. It will lead to higher prices. Please do not move these bills forward. I yield my time.
Thank you very much. I will again defer my questioning. Ms. Fishbach. Thank you. Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, Chairman Latta, H.R. 3668 destroys the Clean Water Act's approach to, quote, cooperative federalism. And it takes states' ability to enforce their own clean water laws out of their hands and gives it to FERC instead. So I thought Republicans were supposed to be in favor of states' rights. So what gives here?
Well, first, there's nothing in the legislation that exempts projects from abiding by the Clean Water Act for any federal or state authorization. And what we're looking at doing is trying to get these things done. We can't have situations where you're trying to move an interstate pipeline across, from one point to another, and all of a sudden have it stopped by certain agencies and departments in the state doing it. It might just because they're against, they might say they're only going to favor.
Or it might be because of a
electric.
legitimate environmental concern.
But again, they're still looking at, you have to go through the entire process. And so, because again, as 3668 also it says, is that requires the agencies to conduct reviews concurrently and in conjunction with the project related by review under the FERC compliance with NEPA. So there's nothing out there that's going to say that the states aren't going to be part of this process. They are going to be part of the process.
Yeah, but I think it sounds like if the states don't agree with what the federal government says, that the states will be out of luck.
Well, everything's being taken in consideration as they go forward with FERC. Yeah, because again, we've got to be able to move things because we're seeing areas of the country that aren't having the ability, like in New England. When it was reported earlier this fall that the New England governors were saying that they were concerned that their citizens up there were going to pay 40% more. Why were they going to pay 40% more for their energy costs this fall?
Well,
because they can't get a pipeline.
Yeah.
And so what are they doing? They're importing where? They're bringing in LNG exports from overseas. They're not utilizing U.S. product.
I'll just say that, as someone who a few years ago had a bad experience with FERC in a pipeline, where FERC didn't care that the pipeline went through farms and basically obliterated them so they could no longer be farms, went through, sensitive areas in terms of the environment where there were other options available. FERC didn't seem to care. Luckily, we were able to prevail at the end of the day. But that experience to me has taught me that that FERC, and this was, I think, might have been during a Democratic administration, FERC doesn't have the answers to everything, and FERC surely doesn't know communities as well as states do. Ms. Castor, would any of these bills do a single thing to bring down prices?
No, they will do the opposite.
Yeah, I don't know what you're hearing back in your districts, but affordability really is an issue. I disagree with the president. It isn't a Democratic con job. It's real. That's why I began my opening by talking about the importance of trying to address this, the healthcare issue, where people are about to see their bills go through the roof, and we could do something at least temporarily. If Republicans have a better plan, let's buy some time for you to implement whatever plan it is. But the bottom line is, people are really strapped. I bump into people in grocery stores who are complaining about the high cost of food. The tariffs are having an impact on prices. And so the idea that, none of these bills will do a single thing to bring down prices seems like we're tone deaf. Let me ask you, Ms. Castro, Republicans are calling this week and next week permitting week. Are these bills a real building block for meaningful bipartisan permitting reform?
No, unless you mean by permitting, they're permitting electric bills to go sky high. That's how I took it.
Again, I'll just close by saying the issue of affordability is real. And if you do town halls, if you're in grocery stores, you have to hear from your constituents that things are getting out of control. And by the way, these are people who are working. Some of them are working two jobs or three jobs, just trying to pay their rent or their mortgage and trying to afford groceries and help their kids out, afford a college education. That's what we should be focused on, stuff that really will address the cost of living. I appreciate both of you here, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
I don't have any questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. Neguse, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Chairman Latta and Ranking Member Castor. Appreciate both of you being here and for your testimony regarding these three bills. I want to start with H.R. 3638. So the bill is called the Electric Supply Chain Act. This is your bill, Mr. Chairman?
Right.
Okay. And I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So the Electric Supply Chain Act legislation would require the Department of Energy to perform periodic studies and reports on the electric supply chain. Is that a fair
Yes,
characterization
close,
of the bill? Okay. And I presume the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains would do this study, or do the reports, I'm sorry.
It would be through DOE, correct? It'd be
Correct.
The Department of Energy.
So the Department of Energy has an Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains. That would be the office that would perform the reports. Would that be a fair assumption?
Just give me 1 second here, let me double check one thing.
I mean, it seems pretty straightforward. Your bill is titled Electric Supply
Right.
Chain. The bill is asking for the Department of Energy to perform
Right.
studies on electric supply chains. And so presumably, the Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains would do the study. Is that not a fair assumption?
Well, here's the situation. You're
Well,
in.
let me, actually, why don't I jump in? I
Yeah.
think maybe some of the hesitation about answering that question is because you're probably aware that the Trump administration eliminated
But-
the Office of
but it would
Manufacturing
be-
and Energy
it would be-
Supply
it would
Chains
be
2 weeks
done-
ago.
It'd be through the DOE.
Correct.
And the DOE has, and I know people are worried about that they're not, some people on the other side are saying they're not out there getting work done.
Uh-huh.
In the last month and a half or two, they've done over 52.
Got it. So walk me
52.
through this.
So-
Walk me through it. Help me understand. You've proposed a bill. It's called the Electric Supply Chain Act. The requirement imposed by your bill is for the Department of Energy to perform studies on the electric supply chain. And the Office of Manufacturing and Electric Supply Chain in the Department of Energy has been eliminated. It no longer
There's-
exists.
And other offices can do
Other
the reports.
offices. So which office is going to do the study on the supply chains?
In the Department of Energy, this is important.
Sure,
Just, I've been fortunate to be on this committee for 15 years.
sure.
And certain things I've seen, in the last Congress, I chaired the Communications and Technology Subcommittee. When the BEAD program came out, which is the $42.8 billion, and this is a little off from the
Yeah, I'm
energy
getting
side,
lost
but-
here.
but-
Is this-
but let me explain here. The problem is that if you don't have the information out there, here's the problem. I ask people because, we haven't been out there even deploying $42.8 billion.
Yep.
Questions you have to be asked, one simple question. First of all, do you even have the personnel to do something? Do you even have the equipment to do it? In this situation, we have to make sure that you do have the equipment out there because it's absolutely essential. I know
So is
I
it your
just spoke at,
argument that
I
the
just spoke at
Office of,
something
I've
today.
given you some
that was
flexibility here,
important
Mr.
that-
Latta.
that's
Is it
why
your
we're talking about
argument
on
that
the grid.
Sure. No, thank you, Madam Chair. Is it your argument that the Office of Supply Chains, of Electric Supply Chains at the Department of Energy, didn't have the expertise to do what you're describing?
There are other offices that can do the job, is what I'm saying.
Got it, okay.
There's other offices of the DOE that can do it.
I think it's a pretty, I hear you, and, you're mustering at least some argument, I think, or rebuttal to what is a pretty fairly obvious point, which is that it's pretty rich for Republicans to put all of their effort into legislation requiring a study on electric supply chains while they're literally eliminating the Office of Electric Supply Chains. I think most Americans would say that doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know why you would, maybe come up with a different title for the bill at least, because obviously, as you know, the Department of Energy, DOGE, as was mentioned by the ranking member, and she articulated this well, has taken a chainsaw to a variety of different federal agencies, including the Department of Energy, and one of the victims was the Office of Electric Supply Chains. So I think there should be a rule in Congress, no, it wasn't a question. I think there should be a rule in Congress that if you support eliminating an office in the federal government, you shouldn't be allowed to submit a bill requiring that office to do studies into the future. Like that's like basic 101 government, I think. That it ought to be prudent for us to say, you know what, we're not going to require a non-existent office to do a study, or make the argument that now there are other offices that aren't named the Office of Electric Supply Chains to do the study on electric supply chains that you believe is very necessary. I guess maybe a broader question connected to this bill. The bill itself doesn't require the Department of Energy to change any kind of policy within the agency, right? This is basically, the bill requires the agency to provide periodic reports to your committee and to your counterparts in the Senate.
Correct.
Okay. I am curious, do you know how many study bills your committee has marked up this year?
Not right off the bat, but I know that it's important. If we don't have the components out there,
Sure.
we're looking at needing between
answer's 12.
155 to 170
I hear you.
gigawatts more power.
I'll
while
answer the
106
question.
to
The answer's
115 are
12.
going offline.
12 study
So
bills.
we've got to make sure we have the grid out there to be able to handle it.
All right. And over the course of the last 12 months, Republicans have been in charge. You've spent an awfully lot of time marking up study bills, studying this problem, studying this problem, studying that problem, and very little time, in my humble view, solving the problem or suggesting solutions that would solve the problem. And I guess my question to you, if the electric supply chain, merits decisive action by this Congress, if, the variety of other bills that have introduced, resource integrated planning, the other bill that you're testifying about today, is of such consequence, it's just unclear to me why you all are spending so much time studying these issues instead of just passing some bills to solve them.
You have to know what the problem is before you can
How long
get
is
to
this
an
going to
answer.
take?
Well, we can move things along, but here's the problem we have.
It took a full year to pass this bill
We have a
to study
supply,
it.
we have a supply.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Sure, by all means.
We have a supply chain issue out there,
Sure.
and I'm glad you admit that. We have a supply chain issue.
Agreed.
We have to make sure that that grid is reliable out there. We have to
agree.
make sure that we have the equipment that goes into that grid, and a lot of problems we have out there today, we don't have it. In fact, I just spoke at an event at noon today with these folks out there on the grid side. They're trying to make these innovations. So with a lot of the innovations, and we had down in the Rayburn foyer, the groups came in to show how you can squeeze more power out of what they can make and produce, because our grid isn't up to that capability when you look at the amount of stress that's coming on that grid. So again, if you don't know what the problem is, you can't get to the solution. And you've got to have the DOE talking to the folks out there, the companies, the innovators, the entrepreneurs that are making these products, so they can understand how we can get this in.
Mr. Latta, I think you did a great job of describing the problem. And by the way, I agree with your articulation of the problem. My point is that your bill that you've introduced this year, right, it's going to take about a full year, maybe more, by the time this passes the House, gets over to the Senate, maybe sometime next summer, the president signs your legislation into law and directs the non-existent Office of Electric Supply Chains to study this consequential issue that you've identified, and the department, they find somebody over there, whoever's left these days, to do the study, and in 2027, 2028, if you and I are still here, perhaps that report gets submitted to us, and then we can finally get down to the nitty-gritty of doing something about it. That's my point. I'm not disagreeing with you on the problem. I agree with you about the issues with respect to the grid and transmission and reliability and all the rest. And I suspect the ranking member would agree with me, Ms. Castor, that she probably concurs in that assessment as well. We'd just like to get to the business of doing something about it. Would you like to?
Well, the other thing
Perhaps-
is, this is such a diversion from what we know is the major cost driver, and those are the arbitrary Trump tariffs.
Correct.
That there have been studies already that have demonstrated that the average household is paying a Trump tariff tax of about $1,600. In some places, a lot more. So it's not rocket science to know that, yes, tariffs are an important strategic tool to use, but these arbitrary ones are raising the cost of energy. They're raising the cost of aluminum, of power poles, of wires, And that is impacting people's household electric bills and electric bills for big business, too.
I couldn't agree more. And, you know, I suppose at the risk of belaboring this point, I'll perhaps ask you, Mr. Latta, with respect to H.R. 3628, similar vein to the questions that I posed earlier. This is Mr. Evans' bill, my colleague from Colorado, the bill regarding amending the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act to add a standard related to state consideration of reliable generation and for other purposes. Obviously, you're familiar with this bill. I want to just make sure I'm understanding this right. This bill does not require state public utility regulators to adopt the standard that the bill is proposing. Or am I?
As I mentioned in my opening remarks, it's to consider. And it goes back to, we
what?
want to make sure the states out there are part of the process and that the federal government's not, everything, you know, it's ramming it down their throats.
I'm going to
Because it's
apologize.
right here, it's on,
Could you
it's
just
to
repeat?
consider. It's to consider.
It's to,
Pardon me?
my apologies, maybe I'm not hearing it right. You're saying
Because again, what the legislation says is it would require the public utility commissions to consider requirements for utilities to have sufficient generation from reliable and dispatchable energy sources. And then it goes down to
okay,
different
yeah,
sources.
sorry. So my apologies, and I think that you're saying, I think the word I misheard was consider. So essentially, this legislation requires, the legislation from Mr. Evans.
It says to consider.
No,
Not
I-
requires.
No, well, let me finish my
Yep.
sentence, then you can correct me if I'm wrong. Mr. Evans' bill from Colorado requires state public utility regulators to consider adopting the standard that he proposes in this bill, right?
It's right, it's to consider, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm asking that is, if this standard is so important, if you feel, as I assume you believe that the standard that Mr. Evans has articulated, and I assume Mr. Evans believes that if the standard that he's articulated is very consequential and important for states to adopt, this bill doesn't require regulators to do that. Regulators can consider now whether or not to adopt this standard. Whether or not this bill becomes law is irrelevant. So there are regulators in Colorado. I presume they know that this bill exists. They can consider it today. It doesn't require this becoming law for them to consider that. Or am I missing something?
Here's the problem we've had. In the past, they were looking at the regulators are out there, and a lot of states were looking at everything. And now we've seen some become anti-fossil, and they say, no, we're not going to do that. And so they're not considering all the issues, all the facts out there that they should be. And so what's happening is that, and when you talk about prices going up, I can tell you why prices are going up around the country, right here. If you look at the top 12 states that have the top, New England is at the top of the list here. And so what's happening is when states out there and regulators are saying that we're only going to consider intermittent power, and there's no problem with intermittent power. We're for an all the above strategy on energy that we came up with in 2008. But here's a question that people never ask about intermittent power. If you have intermittent power, what happens when the sun goes down? What happens when the wind stops blowing? What happens? Do the lights go out?
I hear
No,
you.
the lights don't go out. You know why the lights don't go out? You have to have a second source of power.
I hear you,
And if
Mr.
you have to
Latta.
have a second source of power, doesn't
nobody
that
is-
drive up the cost?
We can have a debate.
And so this is why it's so important then for the states to start considering these things, because if people want to know why their rates are going up, they need to start talking to the people that are doing it to them in their own states.
I will simply close. I didn't ask any questions with respect to the NDA presentation earlier. I appreciate the chairwoman's indulgence here. So I would just simply say this, because Mr. Latta, you said a lot there, and we can have a debate about renewable
love to.
energy. I'm going to finish my sentence now, unless the chairwoman wants to intervene here. So
I'm
we can
listening.
have. Can I finish my statement, or is that? Yes, sir. All right. So we can have a debate, a reasoned debate, about the different sources of energy and the efficacy of renewable energy, and I think it would be a robust debate, and I certainly would welcome that. What I'm suggesting to you is that your bill, actually this is in your bill, Mr. Evans' bill, does absolutely nothing to accomplish the mandate or the directive that you seek to achieve. You could simply say state utility commissions must adopt as part of their integrated resource planning the various components of energy that you prefer. This bill doesn't do that. This bill says state utility regulators must consider it. Okay, so you're going to go through all this trouble of getting this bill signed into law, and state regulators will do the same thing they are doing today. It accomplishes nothing. Very similar to the other study bills that this committee, Energy and Commerce Committee, continues to bring forward before the Rules Committee. And I think that's the disappointment you hear from me and from Ms. Castor, is that there's, I think, an appetite for us to solve these challenges. These bills don't meet, in my view, that moment. And so I will yield back, and I thank you, Chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it greatly. Let me first point out that the Energy and Commerce Committee has passed over 80 bills out of the committee this year. It's one of the most productive committees, and 12 of them were studies, and we had even more in this large bill known as the Reconciliation Bill that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle didn't like, but a big chunk of that bill came out of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And so to say that, all we're doing is studies is a misleading assertion to the American people. The Energy and Commerce Committee is working extremely hard. Would you not agree, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
And further, I would say that in H.R. 3628, if I understood you correctly, that bill makes it so that they must consider all the alternatives instead of only looking at the intermittent or renewables of wind and solar. Is that accurate?
Well, that's correct, because again, what we were seeing is that we see some of these public utilities have gone over to just looking at one thing. If you're looking at just on the green side, they're not looking at everything. And then, so if people ask, again, look at why the costs are going up, if all of a sudden you're having just one out there, you should be looking at everything, not just one area.
And in fact, does the gentleman agree with me that this was a known factor when my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and their predecessors in interest started down the path towards having an elimination of all fossil fuels? And does the gentleman not agree with me, or does he not recall that then candidate Barack Obama said in an interview in 2008 that his various proposals, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket because it would force costly retrofits on power plants, passing costs on to consumers. Do you recall that, Mr. Chairman?
Correct.
And so when my colleagues come in here from the other side of the aisle and start saying that somehow we're not addressing the high cost of electricity, they, in fact, through their policies, eliminating natural gas, coal, and I know a lot of people hate coal, but not in my district. We love coal in my district, but eliminating natural gas, eliminating coal, refusing to recognize the advantages of nuclear, and insisting that we use solar and wind almost exclusively. I know there's some battery issues out there that some of them adopt, but doing that necessarily, just like the policies that were laid out in 2008 are going to make your electricity rates skyrocket, those policies are also making your electricity rates skyrocket. Isn't that true?
Yes.
And would the gentleman agree with me that part of the issue here is that when we have, and this is just a cost of doing business, but when you have the incumbent power lines, the ones that are already there, and you go away from baseload power, and that could be nuclear, that could be coal, that could be natural gas, could be something else, but those are the most common ones that are looked at. If you go away from baseload power, naturally you have to build new power lines because wind and solar are spread out a lot further than a baseload power facility. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And so you have to have new power lines built to wheel or to transmit the electricity from those various locations to the existing high voltage power lines. Is that correct?
Correct.
And when a power company has to retrofit a plant and then has to also build new facilities while an existing facility is still open that would produce that electricity, but now they've got to go to wind and solar, and they have to build new power lines, all of those costs are passed on to the consumer. Isn't that correct?
Correct, and that's also if you have the supply chain to be able to do it.
And that's why you've got to study this to see if there isn't some way we can make that a little bit cheaper on the consumer. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And if we do this correctly, we get a balance on the all of the above, and we can perhaps reduce the additional costs that wind and solar bring to the consumer. Isn't that right, if we have this study?
Correct.
And isn't that the purpose of the study, is to try to make it better on the consumer?
That's absolutely correct, because going right back to the sheet showing from the EIA, showing over a 20-year period on utility prices and the electricity.
And would the gentleman like to have that sheet entered into the record?
If we could.
So
absolutely.
moved. And what is the date on that? Do you have that?
It's the electricity price increases by state July 2005 through July 2025, all sectors and nominal.
All right. Madam Chair, may we have that entered into the record? All right, thank you, I appreciate that. And so when we look at the requirement in 3628 that all state assessments that they need to consider, it's to draw their attention to the fact that this is going to hurt their consumers if they don't use or if they shut down all of their current supplies or don't use nuclear, wind, solar, coal, natural gas. If you don't look at all of it, you're going to cost your consumers more money. Isn't that the purpose of this?
That's correct, because again, to the gentleman, that if a PUCO in a state is going to only look at one source of power, maybe if you say we're just going to go to intermittent power,
and the states,
you've got to have that. Again, you have to have that second set of power, and you got to help the consumer out there.
And right now, some of the states are not considering all of the ramifications, and this is just to make them consider it. And then if the state chooses to double down and make their consumers pay more for electricity, at least they'll know where it came from and know that they actually did consider other alternatives that would have been cheaper. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
I thank the witness, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffith. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you. I'll ask both of you, right now, which is the cheapest form of electricity to build and deploy?
The cheapest is actually conservation and energy efficiency.
Right, that's the cheapest thing
That's
we
the
could do,
absolute
right?
cheapest.
But
But of a producer, it's actually solar. Solar
actually
with battery
solar.
storage.
Right, solar and wind right now are the cheapest forms of energy, of new energy generation, and it's their quickest. Do you agree with that? or-
It's also, you have to look at what.
No, the question is, it's a
question,
single
what's the cheapest?
question. What is the cheapest form of
If
electricity
you're
to build and
heavily,
deploy?
if you're heavily subsidizing, it's going to make another source of power cheaper.
Actually, right now, there is the Scientific American, a June 2025 article, wind and solar energy are cheaper than electricity from fossil fuel plants, even without subsidies. Renewable energy is staying competitive. This is the key thing, is it is right now the cheapest form of energy to deploy. Now, the issue then is, why are prices rising in certain places? And when I look at the literature, Representative Castor, it is often because there's multiple sources. You may run. There is inflation in building out transmission. And some of that inflation is tied directly to Trump's tariffs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then there is also volatility in the fossil fuel market. So if you have natural gas prices going up because, let's say, Russia invades Ukraine or other factors, that raises utility prices for those places that are relying heavily on fossil fuel. Is that correct?
Boy, that is so correct. And you wouldn't believe this, the state of Florida is 75% power generation because of on gas. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, the prices soared. And as the administration seeks to export more of our domestic energy on LNG, people are going to continue to suffer higher prices there too.
Right, and so the policies that the Trump administration are pursuing is actually raising the cost of electricity. for consumers, rather than investing in the olive energy approach that we hear, but these bills don't do that. Representative Castor, do these bills encourage renewable energy in any way, or do they discourage it?
They discourage it, just like they took a hatchet to it in the big ugly bill that will raise consumer costs for energy by 61%, is what's predicted.
And our colleague representing Rhode Island, poor guy, right? Because Trump doesn't like seeing offshore wind from his golf courses. He seems to not like any kind of wind. But wind is actually also in many places in New Mexico. We have a wind farm that's going to produce enough electricity, the same amount of electricity that you get from the Hoover Dam. That's a lot of electricity. It's going to be cheaper. And given the drought, it actually could be more reliable because of the drought conditions. But in Rhode Island, that project was going to bring down the cost of electricity for Rhode Island. Are you aware much about that project?
Yes, and in fact, a federal judge just yesterday ruled against the Trump administration's arbitrary cancellations of offshore wind projects. So hopefully there will be a little bit of relief for folks down the road.
Right, and I think that's the issue that we're looking at now is what can we do to bring down utility costs? And I think that your chart, Ms. Representative Lada, is useful because it tells you where those prices are high, and then it shows, but then we look at what are we trying to do to bring them down. And in places like New England, they are heavily reliant on fossil fuel. So the idea of bringing in a lower cost energy to mix into the system, because nobody is saying you can only have one thing right now.
Right.
Maybe in the future, but not right now. But you want to bring that lower cost electricity in. And when you look at the studies, the lowest cost of electricity right now is renewable energy. So I wanted to also get to the issue of protecting our water. Representative Castor, what is, when I look at these, in New Mexico, we say water is life, agua es vida. Will HR 3668, will these bills help protect our water?
No, they will gut clean water protections at the state level.
They will gut the clean water protections. Will they speed up processing for certificates for pipeline projects?
I was a land use lawyer and that did a little permitting before I came to Congress. And what I learned is when you tinker with these laws and you throw in these kind of barriers, oftentimes they make the projects more expensive and more time consuming. I think that's what will be the result if this were to become law.
Yeah. So we have before us legislation that is going to gut clean water protections. And I think across the country, people are terrified when you say we are no longer going to be protecting our water, right? And we have seen multiple legislation come before this committee where they are gutting clean water protections, where they are allowing different kinds of chemicals to no longer be covered so that those can go into the water table. And in my part of the world, unlike you, we don't have a lot of water, so we rely on our groundwater law, and when we start removing protections that keep our water clean, people are terrified because you cannot live, you cannot have business, you cannot have an economy if you don't have clean water. And you don't have to sacrifice clean water to enable these pipelines go through. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense that we have Republicans pursuing bills that put at risk water, the most essential element that we need to survive, when in essence it does not carry out an objective of lowering costs for Americans. So Representative Castor, I'm the last Democrat. So is there anything else you wanted to add to the conversation, anything else you wanted to clarify with regards to some of some of the testimony today.
Well, just on the integrated resource plans, this is a very complicated process that utilities and locals and states and RTOs go through. And this bill would really put your finger on the scales to say, oil and gas and coal resources get a benefit, and it denigrates the cleaner, cheaper energy that is available now, which, as Congresswoman Leger-Fernandez pointed out, is often solar and wind. But what the majority fails to recognize is the improvement in battery technology. This is the good old USA. We are in a technological revolution when it comes to battery storage and storing that energy. And I know that the fossil fuel companies don't like it. This is a threat to their bottom line. But that is the future, and that is going to help lower prices for families and businesses back home. So I think I recommend to the committee not to forward any of these bills and instead to side on to come down on the side of hardworking Americans and lower electric bills.
Well, the other piece is I thought that you raised is the issue of innovation, right? That we should want our industries involved in innovation and not stuck in the past.
That's right.
And if the United States does not innovate with regards to battery technology, with regards to all of the new forms of energy, including geothermal, including many others, that we are going to be left behind. And if we are not innovating, who is going to be taking the lead with regards to innovation?
I think we know.
Energy? Well,
Unfortunately, it's China. China now is at the cutting edge of a lot of these clean energy technologies, and we're losing manufacturing jobs because of what the Big Ugly Bill did to cut the investments in cleaner, cheaper energy, and that's not okay. That is not okay with hardworking Americans who have those good-paying jobs. That's not okay for for future generations. That's not okay for if you care about trade, if you care about innovation, and so again, it's another reason not to push these bills forward.
well, thank you very much. And I don't want us to give up our innovation to China. I don't want us to be paying more for our electricity. I do not want us to be stripping states of their ability to have meaningful input into these kinds of projects. And for that, I agree with you. We should not be, many of these bills do not make sense. There are a couple that aren't that bad, right? But with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
Thank both of you for appearing. Mr. Latta, was Ms. Leisure-Fernandez right to say that the wind and solar was not a heavily subsidized industry?
It's very heavily subsidized, and not only is it heavily subsidized, again, back in 2008, when we came up as Republicans with our all of the above strategy, was taking all the energy that's out there, but not picking the winners and losers. If I could just add, in one of our March 25th hearing with that we had the president of ERCOT, which is down in Texas, this is what he stated. For context, the development of grid-scale batteries in the ERCOT region in the past 5 years, totaling almost 15,000 megawatts of hours of energy storage capacity, has only resulted in the equivalent energy delivered of a single large gas-fired combined cycle plant running for how long? 12 hours. 12 hours. So, and when you talk about, what Communist China is doing, I'll tell you what Communist China is doing. They're putting on 243 gigawatts of power from where? Coal. They're utilizing everything. So it's, to say that, one of our leading adversary out there is doing one thing, but I think if you ever point out what they're really doing out there, they're going after what they've got, and they're using coal. And again, battery storage isn't where we're at yet. And we'd love to see it, but talking with large energy generators in the southeast, they got capacity for 2 hours. What happens after 2 hours? So this is why the cost, you got to factor in what these costs really are. You've got to have a second source of power when you're using intermittent power. Intermittent power is fine, but you've always got to remember, you've got to have a second source.
That's too expensive. That's pretty heavy.
That's too expensive.
Too
Actually,
expensive.
expensive,
Morgan Griffin,
correct.
before he left, was saying that in West Virginia, his state, he's got coal plant that's existing, it's built, it's paid for, the infrastructure's there. It's about to shut down by these environmental wackos. And what do you call a $7,500 tax credit for a electric car? That's in a form of a subsidy, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely correct. But people didn't want to buy if they didn't have the subsidy.
Well, you know what Roger Williams, one of our colleagues, is doing? He's having a publicity event and burying an electric car. He's burying one because he can't get rid of it, but he's sending a message. It's not only does the public not want it, but the problems that have been, that battery-operated cars have caused, 2 of them blew up in South Carolina. You got to park them outside of a garage. How stupid is that?
Well, and again, you talk to the dealers out there, you know, they can't get rid of the vehicles. And you look at Ford, you look at General Motors, they're moving away from it because they said, you know what, this is the problem around this place. You better listen to what the consumers want, not what the federal government says. When the federal government is going to pick the winners and losers, the federal government always picks the losers.
Picks the losers, and guess who the ultimate loser is? The taxpayer.
Absolutely.
Common sense isn't so common when it comes to this. You want to comment on it?
Well, just the fact that while China does remain reliant on coal, they are eating our lunch when it comes to cleaner, cheaper energy. They are adding exponentially more solar power. And they're not just doing that. They're developing the technology to sell to other countries while America is taking a step back. And that is not okay. We had, under the Inflation Reduction Act, set up investments in communities across America. A lot of communities where they had retiring coal plants that didn't make economic sense anymore. And now we've kind of ripped the rug out from under those communities, those workers, and the heart of our innovation for the future. I think this is not a good policy for the future of our manufacturing, trade, the air we breathe, and costs. So thank you for asking.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you all for your work on this. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. Ms. Houchin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I especially want to thank Subcommittee Chairman Latta for your work on these bills that we're considering here today. At their core, they prioritize reliability, affordability, and efficiency. After 4 years of soaring energy prices under the Biden administration, we're finally course correcting. If my Democrat colleagues truly cared about integrating renewables, they would acknowledge the obvious. You cannot run a grid with wind and solar without natural gas providing the reliability that keeps the system stable. Chairman Latta, you referenced battery storage not being ready for prime time, and I certainly am in the camp that we need an all-of-the-above energy portfolio, and that includes continuing to support our natural gas and our pipelines. The reality is the reforms in these bills raise all boats and become part of a larger portfolio, so I thank you for your leadership. Chairman Latta, could you please speak to why pipelines in particular are so important for keeping prices low for consumers?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And it's pretty simple. You know, years back in the mid-1970s, we were told in this country we had no natural gas and we had no oil. And by putting the right laws in place and then the regulations that followed and turning our entrepreneurs and innovators loose, this country now can outproduce Russia or Saudi Arabia in oil production any given day. And we're the #1 producer of natural gas. And let me just say this, the cleanest natural gas, because what we do here. But what's the good of having a great resource if you can't move it from point A to point B? We've got to be able to do that. And again, this is why when you look at this chart, the states out there, especially in New England, as I mentioned a little earlier, when the New England governors are all saying their consumers are going to pay 40% more than everybody else in the country, it's simple. The solution is simple. It's called a pipeline, just to get it up there to them. They don't have to buy LNG from a foreign country, but this is why it's important we do it. This is not only about talking about making sure that the consumers see a reduction in their costs, it also is going to make production costs lower. 86,000 manufacturing jobs in my district. I always say this, It's not just I need energy in my district, it's got to be affordable. Because if we don't have affordable energy, how are people going to go to work every day?
And you also have the added issue in manufacturing that there are some manufacturing facilities that require 24-hour power, 24/7, to make sure that their product is manufactured and engineered appropriately to be sold to consumers. And having an unreliable energy grid, rolling brownouts, rolling blackouts, would put that commerce at risk too.
You're absolutely correct. And it's just on the manufacturing side, it's the data centers. These centers right now just don't need to have one source of power. They have to have two backups. They can never have a glitch. There can't be a brownout. There can't be a blackout. That's how they have to operate. So in their cases, what we're looking at there is that, what's the most affordable thing for them to get in there right now? They're running natural gas then. And so, at some point, we might have small modular reactors that could be behind the meter, or that they might be able to have their own their own turbines there, the gas turbines that run their operations. But again, it's not by an intermittent source. And again, I'm all for having intermittent power out there, but we always have to remember you have got to have that base load. And base load is what you just mentioned. If you got to run something continuously, it's having that base load. It's not intermittent.
And many energy companies are taking advantage of an all-of-the-above portfolio by providing, when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, utilizing those energy sources to reduce cost. But they also still have to have that pipeline, those other energy sources available for the stability and the reliability of that power. Going back to the cost to consumers, the pipeline issue and making sure that these resources are extended around the country also make sure that the supply is high, because traditional supply and demand, we want to have the supply robust so that those prices do stay down and there's not scarce resources, which in a polar vortex without a pipeline could pose problems and increase cost. Is that accurate?
Correct. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your work on these bills, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Halcyon. Mr. Langworthy, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here today. All three of these bills deal with a simple reality that we can't keep energy affordable or reliable if we can't permit and build the infrastructure that the system depends on. Electricity demand is exploding because of AI, new technologies and manufacturing, and meeting that demand is critical to America's economic strength. If we can't build the infrastructure to support it, we risk falling behind China. While our own projects remain stuck in a permitting maze that slows development for years and years, and it drives up costs. Democrats will say that these bills are about helping special interests, but the truth is that their policies help create the very problems that families are experiencing today. They spent years subsidizing intermittent sources while making it harder to build the reliable, dispatchable generation and pipeline infrastructure that the grid actually depends on. And when North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, and others warn that reliability risks are accelerating, Democrats pretend everything's just fine. We can look to what's happening in my own home state of New York to see what the consequences are of that approach. Aggressive mandates combined with block infrastructure projects have driven up energy costs and limited consumer choice. Families and businesses cannot thrive under policies that ignore how the system actually works. And the same principle applies here. We cannot meet the country's growing energy needs, whether electricity, natural gas, or industrial capacity, if projects cannot get permitted. Supply chains remain fragile, and pipelines take years and years just to receive a decision. These bills do not pick winners and losers. They make sure states prioritize reliability, and they focus the Department of Energy on the supply chain risks NERC has highlighted. And they bring predictability and coordination to natural gas pipeline reviews. This is about keeping the lights on, keeping costs down, and making sure America has the infrastructure it needs to compete, innovate, and lead for decades ahead. Chair Latta, is there anything that you'd like to add or respond to that has been said here today?
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I think it's very important what you mentioned, because, when you're thinking about what we have to do in the future, we have to have power. And what we saw in the last several years, previous to manufacturing being reshored here, because of President Trump's policies of saying we need to get companies back here, and making sure that data centers have that power. But what we saw was a flatlining. And all of a sudden, because of those two, the data centers and the increase in production out there in manufacturing, on a bar graph, it goes straight up. And it's going to keep going straight up. And the predictions are out there, we have to have more power, not less. And I mean, when we talk about more power, it's something, as the gentle lady mentioned a little bit earlier, we have to turn on these factories in the morning. We have to make sure that the data centers are operating. So it's absolutely essential that we have the power, but it's, again, it's not just a small increase in power, it's massive. When you talk about 170 gigawatts in just a few years, how much more we're going to have. But at the same time, when we're losing our cogeneration going offline, and that could be 115 gigawatts, you put the two together, we're in serious trouble.
Now, thank you very much to Mr. Latta. These are practical, common-sense bills that strengthen our energy security, that protect consumers, and that ensure America can compete for the decades ahead. And I'm proud to support them, and I look forward to their passage. And with that, I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Langworthy. I'm not going to ask any questions, but I am going to make a couple of comments. What has made the United States the greatest country in the world, in part, has been reliability and plenty of not expensive energy. I don't want to see cheap energy, but energy that has not been expensive. That's what's made us great since the beginning of this country. And many people don't understand that, and they need to understand it. That's what made us a manufacturing powerhouse. And we were able to compete because other countries could not produce energy on a reliable basis for as little as we could do it. And we have damaged ourselves over the last few years with the Obama administration, the Biden administration. And I think my colleagues have tried to clarify the record on this, and you have too, Mr. Latta. But energy prices jumped to extreme levels under Joe Biden. A full 20% by the end of his first 4 years, and some studies tracked a 29% increase in electricity prices. And I'm going to submit for the record an article from the Wall Street Journal that I'm citing as the 29% increase in electricity prices without any objection. So what congressional Republicans are doing is trying to clean up a 4-year mess left by the Biden administration. We're trying to cut costs, raise wages, lower interest rates, rebuild the strongest economy in the world. And the president is right. Energy is at the heart of that. And so I thank you for bringing these bills before us. I thank you, Ms. Castor, for coming. And with that, with no further questions, the panel is dismissed.
Hey, Madam Chair.
I now welcome our third panel, Representative Huizenga and Ranking Member Waters from the Committee on Financial Services. Your full statement will be submitted for the record. We ask you to summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Huizenga, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGoverns and other members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today before you on H.R. 3383, the Incentivizing New Ventures and Economic Strength Through Capital Formation, or the INVEST Act. Capital and its access to it is the lifeblood for growth and expansion in our economy. Without it, good ideas stay in garages and basements, new jobs are not created, and local economies as well as economic opportunity for the nation suffer. The number of publicly traded companies has plummeted in the last 2 decades from over 8,000 to a little over 4,000 today, a decline of 50%. And while public markets have shrunk, private markets have grown dramatically. Yet more than 80% of Americans are barred by law and by rule from participating in our private markets, not because they lack financial knowledge necessarily, but solely due to wealth thresholds written 40 years ago. This is not just a Wall Street problem, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, it's a Main Street problem. The great financial crisis cost the average American investor immensely, wiping out retirement accounts and pushing American families further into debt. And since that time, the Financial Services Committee has worked on righting the wrongs of the past. The committee has identified regulations that create unnecessary barriers. We've heard from entrepreneurs who cannot access capital outside traditional hubs, professionals with financial expertise who are excluded from investment opportunities, and nonprofit employees who pay more for their retirement investments than private sector workers. The INVEST Act addresses these challenges through targeted, common-sense, bipartisan reforms. These measures are designed to meet the issues of today head-on, while simultaneously building a stronger foundation for tomorrow. The INVEST Act includes 22 of our capital formation bills, 16 of which have already passed the House of Representatives with strong bipartisan support. Nearly every one of these bills has both a Republican and a Democrat co-sponsor. These reforms are focused on three critical priorities. First, the INVEST Act expands access to capital for small businesses. Today, nearly all venture funding flows to just a few coastal cities, leaving entrepreneurs across most of America, including my home state of Michigan, often overlooked. To address this issue, the INVEST Act updates outdated limits that have prevented smaller venture funds and investor networks from raising and deploying meaningful dollars into their local startups. Many of these caps haven't been updated in a decade and no longer reflect today's economy. By indexing them to inflation, capital formation can keep pace, not lag years behind it. Second, the INVEST Act increases investor opportunities. Under this bill, Americans with relevant credentials, professional licenses, occupational experience, or education can qualify as accredited investors. In fact, just this past week, I had a conversation with a local doctor who is an expert in bariatrics, who is working with an inventor and trying to figure out whether he, despite his medical knowledge, is a qualified investor because he's a younger guy. In addition, the bill creates an exam pathway that will allow anyone to demonstrate that they have the financial understanding to invest in these private offerings. No longer will only the wealthy or the powerful have access. Your checkbook and your bank account do not reflect knowledge or common sense. And retirement savers will be able to gain access to the private markets through registered, underscore that, registered investment vehicles such as closed-end funds, empowering them to build wealth for the long term. To safeguard retirees, the INVEST Act also establishes a senior investor task force to combat those who would seek to financially exploit older Americans. Last year, as part of the committee's capital formation agenda, we heard from everyday Americans who, despite the odds, succeeded in achieving their dreams. The bills included in this section relieve or remove those unnecessary burdens. Third, the INVEST Act strengthens public markets. Regulatory burdens have gotten so heavy that companies stay private as long as possible. We used to call them unicorns. Why would you call it a unicorn? Well, it was a billion-dollar company that was remaining private. It was supposed to be so unusual that it was a unicorn. Well, I'm not sure we can call them unicorns anymore since there's herds of them. We have multi-billion-dollar privately held companies out there now. And instead of graduating into that public market, they are making the conscious decision to stay private and avoid all of the unnecessary burdens that they would experience. So we're extending many of the reforms from the Bipartisan Jobs Act, which was signed by President Obama back in the day, to all companies, and we are cutting excessive financial statement requirements, something I have personally worked on for years. We're expanding access to regulated, efficient capital-raising mechanisms for well-established public companies. So, Madam Chair, let me conclude by posing these questions to you and the committee at large. Do we want capital markets that work for all Americans or just for the wealthiest ones? Do we want businesses to grow here in America or overseas? Or do we want all retirement savers to have access to the same investment options no matter who they work for? I know the answers to those questions in my mind. I hope you agree with that. And for champions of American competitiveness and economic opportunity, the INVEST Act ensures American markets remain not only the envy of the world, but where everyday Americans can achieve financial freedom and success. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Huizinga. Ranking Member Waters, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern. I'm here today in strong opposition to H.R. 3383, known as the INVEST Act. This bill, while advertised as a way to help businesses and entrepreneurs more easily raise capital, unfortunately includes 3 holiday gifts to Wall Street, paid for by the hard-earned savings of seniors, teachers, nurses, and other investors. The INVEST Act will expose millions of hardworking Americans to outsized investment risk and junk fees at a time when high inflation and disastrous Trump tariffs already make life and retirement unaffordable. It didn't have to be this way. I worked very closely with Capital Markets Subcommittee Chairwoman, Mrs. Wagner, and the full committee chairman, Mr. Hill. We worked together to craft a package of bipartisan bills that will help small businesses raise capital. But unfortunately, my Republican colleagues could not resist the call from Wall Street to tack on 3 poison pill provisions that will do nothing to help small businesses raise capital. The first provision, Section 202, would remove critical federal protections currently afforded to the 403B retirement accounts, which are used by millions of teachers, healthcare professionals, and nonprofit employees. Today, when mutual funds and variable annuities are sold to 403B plans, the financial professionals making those sales generally must register as broker-dealers, comply with the SEC's regulation, best interest, follow advertising and disclosure requirements, keep records, and comply with SEC and FINRA oversight. For most 403B plans, which are not covered by the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, that is ERISA, requirements, the SEC's rules and oversight provide the only meaningful federal investor protections. Section 202 would amend the securities laws so most intermediaries who sell financial products to 403B plan providers would no longer have to register as broker-dealers, and many of them would also be subject to ERISA rules. Section 202 would also allow 2 types of unregistered securities, collective investment trusts, or CITs, and certain insurance products such as variable annuities to be sold by unregistered investment professionals to 403B plans. Both products sit outside the federal securities laws framework and, unsurprisingly, contain higher fees and are less transparent about their risk. The second poison pill, Section 205, would force vulnerable seniors to receive all financial documents digitally, even though most seniors very much rely on and prefer paper forms. This provision even overrides the decision of an investor who has previously indicated that they want paper delivery. Millions of seniors still don't have access to reliable internet or an email account and would now be in the dark about their finances and investments, and no notice when their financial professional tax on junk fees. Not surprisingly, the AARP opposed this provision when it was considered in committee. The final problematic provision, Section 206, would vastly increase the amount of risky and opaque private assets that Wall Street can sell to unsuspecting investors. Private assets, which include shares in private equity and venture capital funds, are much different from the publicly traded stocks and bonds that most folks are used to investing in. Unlike publicly traded stocks, private assets are not registered with the SEC, meaning Wall Street's cop on the block and all the ensuing protections that come from its oversight are not in place. Importantly, private assets are hard to value, and their financials are not audited in the same way as public companies. So investors remain in the dark about the prospects of the company. For these reasons, our security laws have guardrails on Wall Street so that they don't peddle junky assets to investors who can't withstand the financial risk. Not surprisingly, these provisions are opposed by the groups who are fighting on behalf of everyday Americans, including AARP, AFL-CIO, Americans for Financial Reform, Public Citizen, the Service Employees International Union, Communication Workers of America, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and the state's securities regulators. I have submitted common sense amendments to each of these three provisions that would address the serious harms these provisions would cause, and I urge the committee to make them in order. Without my amendments, I strongly urge all members to vote no on H.R. 3383. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Waters. I'm going to defer my questions and recognize Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't have any questions of the witnesses. I do appreciate them being here, and did read through the bill and got it explained to me.
Thank you. Mr. McGovern.
I want to thank both the witnesses. I agree with Ms. Waters. I will try to make her amendments in order, and if not, I will be with her in voting no. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Norman. Well, we thank you both for coming in. You brought an impressive group of people to back you up, I will say that. They're very good.
A-team showed up,
very
Madam
good-looking folks back there, and we appreciate it very much. There being no further questions, you all are dismissed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think they were all hoping for a little more action.
We are going to recess the committee until after votes. Thank you all very much.
of the United States. Notably for Wyoming and other arid and ag states, Section 404 affirmatively exempts farming, ranching, forestry, and irrigation activities. As the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers have attempted to expand the scope of the Clean Water Act to encompass essentially every drop of water in America, they have also sought to narrowly construe these exceptions into non-existence while simultaneously pursuing aggressive enforcement actions. And why have these agencies become so aggressive against everyday Americans? Because the structure of our 404 statute authorizes them to impose maximum penalties of $25,000 per day per violation. Congress then made the situation even worse in 1990 when it passed a law adjusting the daily fine on an annual basis. In 2014, for example, the inflation-adjusted penalty amount was $37,500 per day for each Section 404 violation. An egregious example of how the agencies have abused this authority happened in Wyoming when one of my clients cleaned out and moved an irrigation ditch on his property, only to have the EPA and Corps of Engineers come after him over 3 years or over 1,000 days later for allegedly violating Section 404, claiming that his ditch was a, quote, navigable water of the United States. In their test case to take jurisdiction over irrigation infrastructure, they sued my client, and when we went to trial, he was facing penalties of almost $65 million for affecting 2.1 acres of land on his own property. We won that case, but only after a 2-week trial and my client expending $1 million to defend himself. Today, 404 violations sit at $68,446 per day per violation. Can you imagine that? Had I been defending my client in 2025, he would be facing Clean Water Act 404 penalties in the hundreds of millions of dollars for cleaning out an irrigation ditch. That is the nature of the monster that Congress has created. There are several other problems with Section 404 as well. For one, the EPA and Corps, upon issuing an agency order claiming that someone violated the act, guilt is assumed, with the accused having no opportunity to fairly defend themselves with the agency. They either admit liability and try to negotiate settlement, or they face financial ruin. Importantly, if such person has the audacity to try to defend themselves in a court of law, they actually carry the burden of proving that they didn't violate the act. The courts, in other words, assume that the agency is correct and force the accused to prove a negative. This obviously turns the concept of due process on its head, but that is how the Clean Water Act has been interpreted and implemented. Settlement, regardless of whether there is any wrongdoing, is almost the only avenue for someone who has drawn the ire of the EPA or the Corps, as only a few days of these bone-crushing fines spells financial ruin for the vast majority of our citizens. My amendment would provide relief against abuses such as these while leaving in place the regulatory oversight and penalty framework which allows us to target actual bad actors. By restoring the $25,000 per day penalty and striking its per violation application, we will have met our twin goals of holding the bad actors to account while disincentivizing agencies from abusing their authority and acting as a totalitarian force. In fact, had the $25,000 per day fine been in place when my client was targeted, he would have still been subject to a penalty of over $40 million. Clearly, a steep fine to be imposed against someone who did nothing wrong. I only provide this comparison to make clear that $25,000 per day in penalties is still substantial, but at least it's a step in the right direction. Today, the regulatory agencies serve as the heavy hand of the law and ignore their mission to assist with regulatory compliance. We need to restore their mission and their rightful place in enforcement. Such an approach is good for the continued success of the Clean Water Act and for our fellow citizens. Reforms such as this would help put Section 404 back on track, and I want to thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and I ask for an affirmative vote on amendment number 47.
Thank you very much. You stated at the beginning you had 3 amendments.
No, they are one amendment, but they are 3 different parts of that.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure, since you mentioned that at the beginning. Ms. Stansberry, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member, members of the committee. I am so grateful for the opportunity to present today in front of the Rules Committee. I'm Representative Melanie Stansbury, and in addition to representing New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, I am a proud water nerd who has worked on water resources my entire career before coming to elected office. And I'm proud to testify here today on the topic of water because, as the Congresswoman Ledger Fernandez from northern New Mexico knows, in New Mexico we say water is life, el agua es la vida. Because water truly is not only the sustaining factor that keeps us alive, but it is a part of our cultura, it is a part of our way of life, it is part of our identity, and it is a part of who we are. And so I am offering an amendment here today to make sure that our waterways can remain clean, protected, and that instead of stripping away federal protections, we are doubling down on the protections of our waterways. And with all due respect, Madam Chairwoman, I'm here today because the Permit Act is essentially a gutting of the Clean Water Act. And so my amendment would ultimately strike and replace the bill that is before the committee tonight and replace it with the Clean Water Act of 2025. And that bill is a bill that was led for many years by our dear colleague Grace Napolitano, who was a leader in clean water, and now by Ranking Member Rick Larson, that would restore the federal protections that were struck down by the Supreme Court just a couple of years ago in the Sackett decision, and the continued assault that we have seen on the Clean Water Act even over the last several weeks under the current administration's Environmental Protection Agency. This amendment would restore the protections that help to clean up thousands of waterways and protect our rivers, streams, and dry arroyos across 5 decades, and to ensure that clean water is not only available to our communities, but it is guaranteed as a human right, as it should be. No person should want their family to have to drink or bathe water that is dirty or contaminated or that is allowed to have chemicals pumped into it. And so we should not, as Congress, be weakening the protections for clean water, but strengthening them. So let me be clear about what the Permit Act really is. It is, frankly, in my humble opinion, as a water resources professional, another corporate handout. And I appreciate that I get to be on a panel with my colleague across the aisle and present a different point of view, because I believe that ultimately, if we pass this Permit Act out of this body, it will make our water less clean, less potable, and endanger the health and safety of our communities, and will make it easier to pollute bodies of water across the country without consequence. And in places like New Mexico, where we only just recently established our primacy over federal waterways, where we are working at the state level to protect our waters from polluters, it is crucial that we strengthen the laws that ensure clean water rather than devastating attacks on the waters that we've seen since the Supreme Court's Sackett decision and the constant chipping away at these protections. And I remind this committee and this body that the Clean Water Act was a bipartisan issue when it passed, because there were rivers on fire. There were rivers that were so polluted, especially in the east and the northeast, that communities were being poisoned daily. And so we need to be strengthening the laws that make it safe for our communities to thrive. And rather than continuing to gut these vital programs, I ask for this committee to support my amendment and to support the health, safety, and the basic human right of accessing clean water. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stansberry. We are, in a moment, going to have to recess because of a glitch that has just developed. And so let me see quickly if anyone has a question. Well, first, let me seek unanimous consent to insert a statement from Representative Gosar in the record. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, so ordered. Thank you. Is there anyone that has a question for Ms. Hageman?
Well, I don't have any question. I want to thank you both for being here. I don't know what the glitch is, but when there's always a glitch, it means late night here. Madam Chair, I request unanimous consent to insert in the record an amendment testimony from Representative Norcross in support of amendment number 21 to H.R. 1071, which prohibits the use of Department of Defense FY26 funding from being used to restrict collective bargaining rights for civilian employees.
Without objection.
And I request unanimous consent to insert into the record an amendment testimony from Representative Tlaib in support of amendment number 1 to H.R. 3628, which amends the definition of a reliable generation facility to require that such facilities have no disparate impacts on any minority, rural, disadvantaged, or tribal communities, including impacts to human health, environmental quality, and local economies. And I also ask unanimous consent to insert another other testimony from Representative Tlaib in support of amendment number 1 to H.R. 3638, which adds requirements to include information on disparate impacts, cumulative impacts, and recommendations for addressing them and assessments prepared under the Act.
Without objection. So ordered. Any questions on the Republican side? Thank you. Ms. Leisure Fernandez.
No questions, and once again, I love the fact that we had the Intermountain states showing up and asking for amendments to these rules, and we said water is life. I was there once here, so the Rules Committee is going to learn the translation. So this was the second time we heard it today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. I thank our witnesses for coming today, and with that, the committee will stand.
We're going to go. Where'd it go? I stand corrected. Glitches don't mean late nights.
Is there anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 3383, H.R. 3668, H.R. 3638, H.R. 3628, or S. 1071? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion of our meeting. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Madam Chair, I move the committee grant H.R. 3898, the Permit Act, a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure or their respective designees. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of substitute recommended by the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure now printed in the bill shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only the further amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. All points of order against the amendments printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report are waived. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 3383, the INVEST Act, under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services or their respective designees. The rule provides that in lieu of an amendment in the nature of substitute recommended by the Committee on Financial Services now printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of substitute consisting of the text of Rule Committee Print 119-15 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill as amended. The rule further makes in order only the further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. All points of order against the amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report are waived. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 3638, the Electric Supply Chain Act, under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority members of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill. The rule further makes in order only the further amendments printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. All points of order against the amendments printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report are waived. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 3628, the State Planning for Reliability and Affordability Act, under a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule further makes an order only the amendment printed in Part D of the Rules Committee report. Each amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. All points of order against the amendment printed in the Part D of the Rules Committee report are waived. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides consideration of H.R. 3668, the Improving Interagency Coordination for Pipeline Review Act, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill should be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of S. 1071, the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2026 under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides an amendment in the nature of substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 119-16 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Armed Services or their respective designees. The rule provides one motion to commit. The rule further provides that the chair of the Committee on Armed Services and the chair of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence may insert in the congressional record not later than December 12, 2025, such material as they may deem explanatory of S. 1071. Finally, the rule provides that on any legislative day of the second session of the 119th Congress before January 6, 2026, the Speaker may dispense with organizational and legislative business, and that the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved if applicable.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We have just received feedback from the Congressional Budget Office that the Hageman Amendment scores, and as such, we will be striking that amendment from the rule. Is there a further discussion on the amendment, to the rule?
I have 3 amendments, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Do we have to vote on striking the Hageman Amendment, or are we going to other?
Well, if it's okay with you.
Yeah, it's okay with us.
Okay.
All right.
You have our word.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 45 to S. 1071, offered by Representative Jacobs, which provides fertility services, including IVF, to active duty service members and their dependents. Madam Chair, I can't even believe that we have to have this debate, this amendment, because the House, and the Senate actually are in agreement. And when both the House and Senate are in agreement, you're supposed to keep the language in the bill. Schoolhouse Rock tells you that. And when leadership swoops in and just makes a unilateral decision that goes against the will of the House and the Senate, I think that that's just wrong. And so I urge a yes vote on this amendment.
Is there further discussion on the amendment from Mr. McGovern? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not
I ask
agreed
for a
to.
roll call, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern asks for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? No. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? No. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? No. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger-Fernandez? Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
And the noes have it, the amendment's not agreed to. Mr. McGovern.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 21 to S 1071 offered by Representative Norcross, which adds section 1110 of the House passed NDAA prohibiting the use of the Department of Defense FY26 funds from being used to restrict collective bargaining rights for civilian employees. Okay, this provision protects civilian DOD employees, period. It was included in the House passed NDAA, but it's now been left out of this final product. Why? We don't really know. At the very least, this chamber should have an opportunity to vote once again to include this language, and I urge a yes vote on my amendment. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, and the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed
I
to.
ask for a roll call, Madam
The
Chair.
clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chair, I have another amendment to the rule. I move the committee add a new section to the rule providing for immediate consideration of H.R. 6074 to extend the Affordable Care Act enhanced premium tax credits for 3 years through 2028 under a closed rule, debatable for 1 hour, equally divided between the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Ways and Means. You know, we are on the precipice of a healthcare crisis, a crisis that Republicans are refusing to address. But no matter how deeply you all bury your heads in the sand, healthcare premiums are about to skyrocket for more than 20 million Americans who get their healthcare on the ACA exchanges. Over the past year, Republicans have voted 20 times, I repeat, 20 times against extending these critical healthcare tax credits. And due to this inaction, we have 9 legislative days left before these credits expire, 9 days to fix this problem before disaster strikes for millions of low and middle-income Americans. I would urge my colleagues to set aside our differences and vote to allow an up or down vote on the House floor on extending these credits. And my guess is if you vote against this motion, it's because you're scared that this bill will pass on the House floor. With that, I urge a yes vote on my motion, and I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not
I
agreed
ask for a
to.
roll call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Ledger Fernandez? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
Clerk will call the roll.
3 yeas,
Clerk will call the tally.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Is there further discussion or amendment? Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 12 to H.R. 3628 offered by myself, which strikes the current text of the bill and replaces it with requirements for the Department of Energy to develop voluntary guidelines and best practices for states and utilities on integrated resource planning of the electricity system. Since President Trump took office in January, Americans' household electricity bills have jumped by 13%. Since Trump thinks the affordability crisis is a hoax, I imagine he would call this one as well. The reality is that Americans know that the rising cost of utilities is not a Democratic hoax. It is reality, and they know it because they open their utility bills every month and are shocked. Unfortunately, the bill we have before us here will do nothing to bring down costs. And America should be at the forefront of energy innovation in an effort to both move us forward and bring down costs. And we cannot just rely on the technologies of the past to power our future. Our electricity grid faces increased challenges, and we need our states to have the tools to be able to plan for those challenges. My amendment would do just that. It would strike the current bill text and replace it with provisions for my bill, the Integrated Resource Planning Modernization Act. The that act would direct the Department of Energy to develop voluntary integrated resource planning guidelines and best practices so states and utilities can modernize how they plan for their future electricity needs. I urge a yes vote on my amendment to make our grid more affordable and more reliable. And with that, I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question's on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no? No. In the
Recorded.
opinion, Chair,
Recorded vote, Madam Chair.
the clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach? No. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy? Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy? Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack?
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scallon? Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse, aye. Ms. Leisure Fernandez?
Aye.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair?
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order amendment number 15 to H.R. 3898 offered by Representative Stansbury, which strikes provisions of the bill after the enacting clause and inserts the text of the Clean Water Act of 2025. In New Mexico, we cherish every raindrop and snowflake that fills our water cups, grows our crops, and protects our forests. New Mexicans cannot afford for any pollution to contaminate our scarce water supplies and threaten our livelihoods. For 50 years, the Clean Water Act provided essential protections against water pollution, but recent rollbacks have gutted this landmark and bipartisan law. And what we need to do now is come back and reinstate those important provisions of the Clean Water Act that have been sacked by the Sackett ruling. Now, House Republicans would codify further destruction of the Clean Water Act, and instead of protecting Americans from PFAS, for example, House Republicans want to shield corporate polluters who discharge PFAS, a forever chemical, in their wastewater. Congresswoman Stansbury's amendment would strike the Permit Act and replace it with the Clean Water Act of 2025. I urge a yes vote on my amendment to provide certainty to the American people that we will keep their water clean. I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed to. Hearing no further discussion, the question is on the motion from the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
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 In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to.
Roll call, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern asks for a roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach?
Yes.
Mrs. Fishbach, yes. Mr. Norman?
Yes.
Mr. Norman, yes. Mr. Roy? Aye. Mr. Roy, aye. Mrs. Houchin? Mrs. Houchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy? Aye. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. Scott? Aye. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Griffith? Mr. Griffith, aye. Mr. Jack?
Aye.
Mr. Jack, aye. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scallon? Mr. Neguse? No. Mr. Neguse, no. Ms. Leisure Fernandez?
No.
Ms. Leisure Fernandez, no. Madam Chair?
Aye.
Madam Chair, aye.
The clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion to report is agreed to. Accordingly, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, will be managing the rule for the majority.
And Ms. Ledger Fernandez will be managing it for the Democrats.
Thank you very much. Without objection, the committee is adjourned.